Alright, so section 3, carbon compounds. This goes over the stuff that we've been talking about as far as chemistry of life goes. For this section, we're going to go through our bell ringer, or our warm-up. We'll look at the key ideas. We'll look at building blocks of cells, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, and then we'll summarize the entire thing. It's important for us to realize that when we're talking about the building blocks of cells, we are talking about carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Alright, so we're going to look at a couple of different foods, and you need to write down what you think all of these substances have in common. So please pull out your warm-up sheet. On your warm-up sheet, in some of the space below what we just did on our PowerPoint, please fill out some of the different foods as far as what you think they have in common. And that might go back to what we just talked about schnapps. So some of the different foods that I want you guys to think about. Think about bread. What are some things bread's made up of?
Yeast bars.
Just write it down on your warm-up sheet. Alright, key ideas for our section. Our key ideas that we're going to go through in this section: what are the chemicals of life made from? And we're talking more in depth than just when we talk about atoms. We're talking about what are the combination of atoms that cause materials to exist as we know it in the form of life. What is the role of carbohydrate in cells? What do lipids do? What determines the functions of proteins? What do nucleic acids do? So to start, the building blocks of our cells. The parts of the cell are made up of large, complex molecules called biomolecules. Biomolecules are built up from simpler, smaller, repeating units. Biomolecules contain atoms of carbon. And again, they can also contain some of those other elements that we just talked about in schnapps: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Carbon bonding. So the picture right here shows some of the different ways in which carbon bonds. In this instance, we've got a straight carbon chain right here. We've got 4 atoms of carbon bonded to hydrogen. We've got branched carbon chains. Again, all of these are combined with hydrogen. We've got carbon rings, all attached to hydrogen. And right here's a simplified view of a carbon ring. There's single bonds that occur. Carbon bonding to carbon, hydrogen is bonding to those carbon atoms. Double bonded, and then also triple bonded. So double bonded is when there's a sharing of more than 1 electron, specifically 2 in this instance. Triple bond is when there is a share of 3 electrons. Okay, so double bond is a share of 2 electrons. Triple bond is a share of 3 electrons. Carbohydrates are molecules made of sugars. A sugar contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. Glucose is a common sugar found in grape juice. It's also found in a number of other substances. Glucose is important for your body. It is the source of sugar that your body uses for energy, for the production of energy. The sugar glucose, its carbon or its arrangement is six atoms of carbon, 12 atoms of hydrogen, and 6 atoms of oxygen. And again, remember we said the ratio is 1 to 2 to 1. If we reduce this to lowest terms, we could divide all by 6. 6 divided by 6 is? 6 divided by 12 is? 6 divided by 6 is? So a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Glucose is a monosaccharide. It is about the most simple sugar that we can possibly produce. Two sugars that are linked together are called disaccharides. So a monosaccharide, mono being 1, disaccharide being 2, and then many sugars that are linked together are called polysaccharides. Monosaccharides and disaccharides are simple carbohydrates. They're not very long chains. They're either one molecule of glucose or 2 molecules of glucose. Polysaccharides can become very complex. There can be long chains of sugars making up polysaccharides.
Carbohydrates are organic compounds made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Hydrogen and oxygen atoms exist in a ratio of about 2 to 1. The number of carbon atoms varies. A single carbohydrate unit, such as glucose, is called a monosaccharide or a simple sugar. Monosaccharides contain a carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. Thus, monosaccharides have a formula C6H12O6. Glucose, fructose, and galactose are the most common monosaccharides. Two monosaccharides can combine in a condensation reaction to form a double sugar or disaccharide. Sucrose, a common table sugar, is formed from glucose and fructose. A polysaccharide is a complex molecule composed of 3 or more monosaccharides. Animals and plants store carbohydrates as polysaccharides. In plants, glucose molecules are linked in the polysaccharide starch.
Cells use carbohydrates for sources of energy, structural materials, and cellular identification. Carbohydrates are a major energy source for us inside of our cells. And not only us, but all organisms use carbohydrates for those different things, for sources of energy, for structural materials, and for cellular identification. So carbohydrates are used to identify the type of cell that is made. Chitin and cellulose. They are complex carbohydrates that provide some support. Chitin is found in the cells of insects and the cell walls of mushrooms. Also, many other fungi have chitin in them, in their cell walls. Cellulose is found in the cell walls of plants. So that hard external structure that makes up the cell wall of plants, that is made up of cellulose. And then in a complex organism, cells reorganize neighboring cells by the they recognize the neighboring cells by the short branch chains of varying sugar units. Lipids. Lipids are another class of biomolecules. They include fats, phospholipids, steroids, and waxes. Lipids consist of chains of carbon atoms bonded to each other and to hydrogen atoms. This ends up causing lipids to repel water, which is very important because lipids are used to make up your cell membranes. If cell membranes did not repel water, water would dissolve your cells. So you've all seen The Wizard of Oz where the witch is like, I'm melting, melting, right? If lipids did not repel water, if they were dissolved by water, that's exactly what would happen if we were touched by water. Our cells would be dissolved. The main function of lipids includes storing of energy and controlling water molecules. So lipids allow water in and out of the cell without dissolving the cell. The main purpose of fats is to store energy. Energy is stored much more efficiently in fats than in carbohydrates. The membrane of our cells is made up of phospholipids. And the structure of a cell membrane depends on how this molecule interacts with water. And then waxes. They're found on the surface of plants and aquatic bird feathers. They help to prevent evaporation of water from the cells of the organism. They help to repel water from the surfaces of feathers and plant leaves or plant structures.
Lipids are nonpolar molecules that are not soluble in water. Many lipids are made from a molecule of glycerol with fatty acids attached to it. The lipid shown here is a triglyceride composed of 3 molecules of fatty acid joined to 1 molecule of the alcohol glycerol.
Called triglycerides because there are 3 fatty acids attached. If you're using a tripod, how many legs does it have? 3. The term tri meaning 3.
Phospholipids have 2 rather than 3 fatty acids joined by a molecule of glycerol. The place where the 3rd fatty acid attached in the triglyceride is now occupied by a highly polar group. This combination of polar hydrophilic head and nonpolar hydrophobic tail allows the phospholipids to form membranes.
Okay, so this is the structure that we would see in the membrane of our cells, and it helps to repel water.
A wax is a type of structural lipid. A wax molecule consists of a long fatty acid chain joined to a long alcohol chain. The final type of lipid is a steroid. It does not have a fatty acid chain, but like the other lipids, it is not soluble in water. Steroids are composed of 4 fused carbon rings with various functional groups attached to them. The groups give the steroid its characteristics. Steroids include cholesterol, shown here, as well as cortisone, testosterone, and progesterone.
Proteins. Proteins are chains of amino acids that twist and fold into certain shapes. They determine exactly what the proteins do. Proteins form or go through a number of different functions. They may be involved in structure, support, movement, communications, transportation, and carrying out of chemical reactions.
Proteins are large molecules made of amino acids that are linked together. Cells use 20 different types of amino acids to make proteins. The only difference between one amino acid and another is the group shown in the red circle. The way amino acids combine determines which protein is made. Proteins do many things in the cell. Some proteins increase the rate of chemical reactions. Other proteins are used to build structures such as spider webs, horns, feathers, and hair.
So a protein is a molecule made up of amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks that are linked together to form proteins. Every amino acid has an amino group and a carboxyl group. And units of amino acids can form links called peptide bonds. The side group gives an amino acid its unique properties, and there are 20 different amino acids found in proteins. As far as we know, all organisms are made up of these same or different arrangements of these same 20 different amino acids.
All amino acids have a central carbon atom that is bonded to an amino group. An amino group consists of a nitrogen atom bonded to 2 hydrogen atoms. The central carbon in all amino acids is also bonded to a carboxyl group, which consists of a carbon atom double bonded to an oxygen atom and single bonded to a hydroxyl group. The difference between all amino acids lies in the R group. The amino acid glycine has the simplest R group. It consists of only 1 hydrogen atom. The R groups of most amino acids are far more complex. When the hydrogen in the R group of the amino acid glycine is replaced with a methyl group, the resulting amino acid is called alanine. There are 20 amino acids commonly found in proteins that all differ by their R group alone. The differences among the amino acid R group gives different proteins different shapes. These different shapes allow proteins to perform many different roles in the chemistry of living things.
Level of structure for proteins. For each type of protein, amino acids are arranged in a specific order, the protein's primary structure. The interactions of the various side groups may form coils and folds, and this gives the protein's secondary structure. The overall shape of a chain of amino acids is the protein's tertiary structure. The quaternary structure is the overall shape that results from combining the chains to form protein. The overall shape of proteins gives different characteristics. So for example, proteins are combined together to create your hair. Depending on how those proteins are arranged, gives you your hair color. It also gives you your hair type. Is your hair fine? Is it curly? Is it wavy? So those proteins and how they are arranged gives you the structures that make up your body. Nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are the last type of organic molecule that makes up living things. A nucleic acid is a long chain of nucleotide units. A nucleotide is made up of 3 major parts: a sugar, a base, and a phosphate group. The nucleotides of deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, contain the sugar deoxyribose. And nucleotides of ribonucleic acid, or RNA, contain the sugar ribose. So we've got DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. They use the sugar deoxyribose. RNA contains the sugar ribose.
Nucleic acids are very large, complex organic molecules. Deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, is a type of nucleic acid. It can be found in every cell in your body. Each nucleic acid is made up of a string of nucleotides. These nucleotides have 3 parts: a phosphate group, a 5-carbon sugar, and a nitrogen base. DNA is made up of 2 strands of nucleotides wrapped into a spiral or helix. RNA, or ribonucleic acid, is made up of only 1 strand of nucleotides.
So hereditary information. Remember, hereditary information is that information that gives what you look like to you. And hereditary information are the things that are usually passed on from parents to offspring. So the DNA molecules act as instructions for the processes of an organism's life. DNA consists of two strands of nucleotides that spiral around each other. RNA interacts with DNA to help decode the information. And then nucleic acids store and transmit hereditary information. Energy carriers. Some single nucleotides have other important roles. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP, is a nucleotide that has 3 phosphate groups, and it supplies energy to our cells. Energy is released in the reaction that breaks off the 3rd phosphate group. So what our body does is it actually takes and builds ATP. It adds energy in order to create ATP. As that ATP moves around to different parts of your body can then break down ATP by breaking off the 3rd phosphate group, and energy is released. And then there's other single nucleotides that transfer electrons or hydrogen atoms for other life processes as well. So to summarize, large complex biomolecules are built from a few smaller, simpler repeating units arranged in an extremely precise way. Cells use carbohydrates for sources of energy, structural materials, and cellular identification. The main functions of lipids include storing energy and controlling water movement. Proteins are chains of amino acids that twist and fold into shapes that determine what a protein does. And then nucleic acids store and transmit hereditary information. Also, on top of that, ATP is what we use for energy inside of our cells.